What we are going to cover today is the dissemination work package in your ERC Consolidator applications. This session is for information only. This is not an official ERC or the EC or the EIC, anything to do with European Commission. However, everything that I will share today in this session comes from my own experience of being a communicator and outreach and dissemination expert for the last 8 years. That is something that I want to make clear from the beginning, that this is not sponsored or endorsed, or I'm not an ambassador of ERC or EIC or anything whatsoever. I'm an independent entity. So all the views and all the comments are my own. Now that we have that out of the way, I assume all of you know me on LinkedIn. So a little bit that you don't see on LinkedIn is something that is the journey that I've had. So basically, I started with a master thesis in Klaus von Klitzing's group at the Max Planck in Stuttgart. After that, I went on to getting a PhD and then spent 5 years in 2 different industries. And since last year, I am flying solo. I will come to that later on. I thought this is a fun slide to put together. It was fun for me to make because over the last 8 years, I've worked with a lot of different scientists from all over the world. And these are only from Europe. What is missing here is, of course, the Americas and India and Australia and Singapore. However, just to give you a bit of the feeling of who is guiding you through the budgeting for your dissemination work package. And recently, together with my team, we also received an award from the Institute of Physics for innovative public engagement. So that is who I am. And all the work that you see on the right side over here, all the logos and all the features and whatsoever is done under the umbrella of the Science Talk. So the Science Talk is essentially my company, which I started, and it started off as a passion project. And now it has taken a life of its own. It's my profession now. My mission with the Science Talk is to help scientists communicate their research and their science with clarity and impact in digital spaces. That is what my focus is. I have a podcast. I also offer strategy consulting for big research consortia or individual scientists, or also for companies. And the third pillar, so to say, is branding, which is the trainings for scientists. So personal branding for scientists, how to communicate science in the most impactful way, how to start a podcast. So basically everything that comes under the umbrella of trainings is what branding is all about. And the Science Talk, since this year, is also an official business acceleration services partner of the European Innovation Councils. The EIC essentially handpicks the service providers for the EIC beneficiaries, so Pathfinder, Transition, Accelerators, so on and so forth. And the Science Talk is one of the official EIC partner. Having said that, again, everything that I'm sharing here is not coming from EIC or ERC or EC as a whole, which is European Commission. I am an independent entity, and everything I share is coming from my own perspective. These are my own views. So do not think that I am being paid or I'm affiliated with the ERC. So just to have that clear. Awesome. Let's talk about the ERC Consolidator, right? All of you, I'm assuming, are applying for the Consolidator grant, the deadline for which is 13th of January, 2026, which is 8 weeks away, something like that. Quite a nerving time for sure. Basically, what ERC is for, this is something you already know if you're writing the application. So you get a grant for consolidating your independence by establishing your research team and continuing to develop a successful career. That is what the Consolidator is for. This means that even if you don't have an independent group right now, you can use the Consolidator grant for starting your own group, or if you're already running an independent group, then you can use the Consolidator to grow and expand that group. That is essentially what ERC is. ERC is offering these Consolidator grants for. Essentially, as an overview of the timeline, your application deadline is over here on January 2026. Right now, in November 2025, we are somewhere here, potentially. From the application to you actually starting the project, it takes at least 18 months, because approximately 1 year is to do the evaluation, your interview and everything. And then after that, it takes up to 6 months to actually sign the grant agreement so that you can start your ERC project. So that is the approximate timeline that we are looking at. So from application to starting your project is at least 18 months. And then once you start your project, of course, you have 5 years. So assuming you start in mid of 2027, that means that your project or your grant will go until June 2032. Essentially, what I want to say is that from application, like handing in your application and your budget to finishing your grant, it is about 7.5 years. So you have to think ahead in 8 years timeline. So right now you're like, oh my God, I'm clicking on the submit button. And when you start the grant, you're like super excited and super pumped to start your grant. And then by the end of it, you're super happy that you successfully finished the grant. And you probably also hopefully have other grants for the future as well beyond 2032. That is the timeline you should think about, and not just okay, short term, that okay, in 2027 what I want to do, 2028 what I want to do, so on and so forth. Usually in a communication or dissemination work package, what everyone will write is, it's also required, is you will publish scientific papers in open access journals. You will present at conferences, not just you as the group leader, but also your team members, which includes masters, PhD, or postdocs. They will also present the work of the group, which is by extension is also your work, at national or international conferences where the audience is your niche field. And so this is the classical sort of communication channels. And then you might also have that, okay, your team will post regular updates on social media, such as LinkedIn. I don't know if anyone is still using Twitter or X or Blue Sky, but essentially on social media. This is something that is like a checklist that some people might also add in the dissemination work package as activities, and then budgeting for that accordingly. As you all are quite experienced scientists, I don't think you need guidance on how to estimate and budget for open access publishing or for attending conferences. That is something I'm sure you all are quite good at, and your host university or host institution will also be able to help you with this. So the ERC, in terms of the publications, ERC only covers the cost for open access publications and not for hybrid or behind the paywall, that sort of journals. For that, so for the open access journals, to estimate the publishing costs, you might want to check with your university, your library, or your admin staff, whoever, to get the feeling for how much they will cover potentially. And then based on that, you can budget approximately, so to say. But you have to be, of course, realistic. Do not just, okay, I'm going to publish 10 papers every year. That means 50 papers at the end of 5 years. It's a bit unrealistic, probably, depending on which field you're in. So these are the classical or traditional activities that you will put in your dissemination work package, and maybe also a press release from your university when you win the grant or when you are publishing some paper or whatsoever, these kinds of things here and there, the activities which are not really under your control. But when it comes to dissemination or communication beyond your niche field of research, what tends to happen, because you are making assumptions about the team will post on social media or team will take care of about the dissemination of the work results or your group's scientific results beyond your niche audience, what tends to happen is that you as the group leader or you as the principal investigator or the PI, you will end up doing it yourselves. The things I'm not talking about the publications or conferences, I'm talking about dissemination beyond your niche field of research. And these are your research stakeholders or the public. And in a bit, we will also do the audience mapping to understand the difference between communication and dissemination. But essentially, think of it as anything that goes beyond publishing papers and conferences. Of course, you would want to do it when the grant is running, when you're actually doing the research. But if you don't plan for it or if you don't budget for it well in advance, PIs who do that tend to end up doing it themselves, or they outsource the work to their teams like masters, PhD, or postdocs who do not have any formal training on the best practices when it comes to communication in digital spaces or dissemination beyond the conference that they're presenting at. And what then ends up happening is that there is the dissemination that is about your work and about yourself is last minute, it's unplanned. And what ends up happening is that you're not super happy with the outcome. And even if you manage to do all of this yourself or your team manages to do all of this because you didn't plan for it, because you didn't budget for it, what happens is that you end up feeling, or you will end up feeling, that, oh my God, this is a lot of work. And this is how you would end up at the end of or during the grant that is running, that I just have so many things to do. We want to avoid this. This is why you are all in this session. We want to avoid this. We want to make sure that you don't end up like this and rather end up more happy, so to say. How to do that? What you want to remember, or what I want you to remember, is that you are budgeting and planning for your future self. So you have to be very realistic about what you can do and what you promise and what you want to do, right? So a way to go about this is thinking of where you will be in 18 months from now. So that means from January to actually starting your project, where will you be? Essentially, of course, your size of your team will increase. You will have more number of team members. Your teaching workload will also increase if you're teaching. And the tasks that you do for free as a favor, which show your initiative, that is organizing conferences or organizing sessions in big conferences, or being a reviewer, not just for the papers, but also for grant applications, depending on where you're based and your level of seniority. These are the things that you don't get compensated for right away in money. And these are the things that you do for free when you're actually doing it. Of course, these things have an impact in the mid or long term, because these are the things that help you with solidifying your credibility as a scientist, your visibility, and your networking. And that, of course, ends up being that you get more opportunities. And this is important for your career progression as well. These are the free activities that everyone ends up doing. All scientists end up doing it. And the higher up you go, or the longer you stay in academia or in research, these kinds of activities just start piling up and up. Be realistic about these things. Try to be a bit realistic about it. Of course, no one can predict the future, but you can have a realistic picture of how your life, or how your professional and personal life will look like in 18 months from now. And of course, there are changes also in private life as well. Maybe you are moving houses, or maybe you're moving cities. I don't know whatsoever. These are also the kinds of things that take up your brain space, your head space. So you have to be a bit mindful about what exactly will you be able to do in 18 months from now. And then also think about where will you end up being, or where do you want to be in 7 years from now? So planning and budgeting for your activities when it comes to communication and dissemination, these are the things that I would recommend thinking about realistically. And I will tell you the best practices, or rather what you can do and what you should try to avoid also in this session. Let's move on. So one of the ways to mitigate this or manage this expected workload is that, I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but of course you get the 2 million euros for 5 years, but you can also ask for additional 1 million funding plus another million if you're moving to Europe or EU member state also. But this additional funding of 1 million, even the group leaders who are, or independent researchers who are in Europe or who are eligible to apply for the consolidator, you are eligible to apply for this additional funding for necessary work that needs to be carried out. For instance, hiring a postdoc from Australia. I don't know, I'm making this up. Or going on a field trip, because that is crucial for doing your research, or for success of your consolidator grant scientifically. But what you need to remember is that you need to budget for this already when you're submitting your application, which is in January 2026. Once you submit the application, you cannot apply. When you win the grant, you cannot apply, or you cannot get this additional 1 million. So think about this strategically, in the sense that maybe this 1 million can also be used for leadership and management skill trainings for you. Of course, that will not take 1 million, but there are a bunch of activities that are in your mind that that will help you and your team in the future with becoming a strong academic or a strong research leader. So think about these activities and budget for those. You don't have to ask for the entire 1 million. Of course, you can also ask for a few more hundreds of euros, but this is something that you have to put in your proposal from the very beginning. And then you also should explain this in the resources section, where you can explain what is the budget actually for and what your plans are. So there are ways to mitigate this. The ERC is trying to make it a bit easier because they also realize that there is a lot of pressure that the group leaders are under, or the ERC Consolidator grantees are under. Then coming now to the definition of communication or dissemination. This is the latest one. This was published in 2025, October. So essentially last month, like a few weeks ago, 25th of October, I think. And the source is here. So I can share the slides with you all if you want, or I can also share the source with you all so you can read it yourself. It's quite an extensive document of, I think, 6 or 7 pages. It's quite informative as well. And this one is specifically for dissemination and exploitation. But in your case, as ERC Consolidator, dissemination is the more relevant. Of course, exploitation is also interesting potentially for some of you, but I'm going to cover the dissemination aspect, right? So what is dissemination? So dissemination refers to the targeted transfer of knowledge and results to relevant stakeholders. Relevant stakeholders, this is very important. The relevant stakeholders are not just the scientists in your niche field, but they are scientists from adjacent fields to yours, or industry or commercial partners, or civil societies or policymakers. So these all come under the category of relevant stakeholders, like a research stakeholders, just to have that in mind. And the goal or the targeted transfer for use is what makes this different from communication, because communication has to be more broad and more towards the general public in mind. So that means Open Doors Day at your institution, or any public engagement or outreach activities like going to the schools, like your local schools, to talk about your research. So that would be the classically communication thing, but the dissemination is essentially for the general awareness and visibility of your project towards the relevant stakeholders. So that is the difference now between communication and dissemination. And there is a lot more information in this PDF document from the the European Research Executive Agency. For instance, with dissemination, you should identify who your stakeholders are, your research stakeholders are. You should create the key messages because you don't want to tell everything to everyone. You should tell, depending on who your audience is, you have to tailor the messages. Of course, the open access, that is non-negotiable, and a bunch of different things. But basically, you have to identify who your target audience is, and then what the key messages are, and then make sure that the information that you're sharing with them, or the findings that you're sharing with them, are available to them. So open access. And in this case, open access doesn't only mean for the papers that are published, but it also means creating a YouTube video, creating a podcast, which is open access as well by its nature, and social media as well. That is also openly available. So open access means that your target audience doesn't have to pay to consume that content. It's not behind the paywall. Now, what does this concretely mean, or what would be the expectations or challenges or audiences or goals are for the different stages of the ERC grants? Of course, there is starting, there is consolidator, and there is advanced. And what we are going to focus on, or rather the goals and the audience and the strategy, of course, is different for each of these. But of course, we are here for the consolidator session. So we're going to focus specifically on the consolidator, ERC consolidator. So the applicant, this is something you already know. And the goals when I'm talking about goals, I specifically mean communication and dissemination work package goals, not your scientific goals, right? That is something that I'm sure you all have taken care of already. So in terms of goals for a consolidator grantee is to make sure that you're positioning yourself as a mid-career research leader in your field. Leader is very important here, and you're expanding your collaborations beyond the initial networks. I'm sure all of you have collaborations already, that's groups and institutes and companies potentially that you work with. But the goal of your communication or dissemination during your ERC Consolidator grant to expand that collaboration network beyond your initial network. And the third one is also to demonstrate the cross-field impact and potential applications as well. And this means cross-field can mean between the two scientific disciplines. If your work is more in the physical sciences or an engineering section or that category, then working potentially, depending on what you're working on, with the life science field. So that is just an example of this. Now, for Consolidator, your audience, and these are your stakeholders, research stakeholders that you should think about when you're planning and doing any sort of dissemination of your Consolidator grant. And these are your, of course, research collaborators, institutions, and interdisciplinary partners. This could be company, this could be a society, this could be policymakers. And the strategy, what you could do is to develop a project website or your own group's website and a media kit that you can just simply give to your team to also onboard them properly, so that there is no miscommunication on the alignment. There is alignment between what is put out at the conferences or any sort of networking events. Then another one could be to organize a public-facing workshop or a virtual webinar series, which any and everyone are invited to join, and also highlight the fact that you're doing interdisciplinary research and highlighting that in your outreach activities. And from my experience, what I've seen is that the challenges that are faced by the Consolidator grantees is to overcome the silos between disciplines, because you are very focused on your niche field of research and you simply don't have the time to inform yourself about the other field and then identify what are the potential collaborations. It also takes time. Another challenge is translating the complexity into relevance. And this is very important when it comes to dissemination or even communication. But translating your scientific research into relevance is extremely important when it comes to the research stakeholders, because to them, you should make sure that the information that you're giving them or what you're telling them about your project is actually relevant for them, so that there is a possibility for collaboration, and which means career growth or professional career growth for yourself. So to summarize, as an ERC consolidator, think of the dissemination activities or work package as connecting, collaborating, and amplifying your research. So these are the three keywords that you can think of when you're thinking about the activities and tasks for your dissemination work package. Moving on. So now this is where we come to the audience mapping, because as we saw earlier as well, identifying your target audience is very important. That is usually the first step in any sort of communication, dissemination, or even exploitation. And so you are here. This is your niche field. These are the scientists who write papers with you. That is your team, your colleague next door, or your current collaborators. Then we go in the second circle. That is your adjacent disciplines. And these are essentially scientists who might read your papers every once in a while, depending on if it is interesting for them. And for instance, this could be your colleague down the hall. So not your immediate colleague, but a colleague down the hall. And research stakeholders, in your case, what they would do is that they might read your papers if they know that you exist, right? So this is very important. And it's not necessary that they will read your papers. Maybe they are aware of you and they read a little bit, they read the abstract or the conclusion part of it. And these are your policymakers, research stakeholders, future collaborators. And then we go in the outer circle, which is the general public, who have no idea who you are, and you write papers or you present at conferences. But these are the people whose taxes are funding your research. So you have the obligation to communicate to them when you sign your grant agreement with the ERC. And who comes in this category is the local public, the local policymakers, the schools, high school, middle school, until undergraduate schools, and your parents and kids. Thinking about that a little bit. These are the people who are like, okay, like my son or my daughter does something in the lab to do something and they're traveling around, but we don't really know, or the kids don't know what their papa or mama are doing. They just go to the office and write a lot on their laptop potentially. That is something that they would think. These are your audiences that you are communicating to or sharing the insights from your research. Now we do the difference between communication and dissemination. Communication comes under the general public, comes under the communication bracket, and your niche field also comes under the communication bracket, because this is, in this case, you're also communicating when you're presenting at conferences or writing papers, you are communicating to your niche field of research. The research stakeholders and the adjacent disciplines come under dissemination, because these are targeted audiences for whom you should create key messages and think about the relevance of your research to them. So dissemination or communication outcome, or a way to measure it, is that you're establishing yourself or solidifying yourself as a credible scientist in your niche field, and you are also getting collaborations out of it. And dissemination is essential for visibility, of course, collaborations beyond your niche field, and also very important for attracting and hiring excellent talent. This is something that a lot of consolidator grantees overlook. And this is where your leadership is something, and management skills is something that is very important. And one way of also attracting and hiring excellent talent is to make sure that you are doing dissemination properly. Thinking about it, we come to the target audience, key messages, and the channels where you're putting the information out, right? Now, communication examples of activities is, of course, Open Doors Day that is organized by your host institution, the conferences that you go to, publications, or presenting your science at a pub or a science slam or whatsoever. This is all coming under the category of communication, because these are targeted at either the general public or the scientists in your niche field. This is your communication. Dissemination is creating a video, putting it on YouTube, or recording a podcast, putting it on an open access platform, actively curating your content that you put out on social media. This is something that is more under dissemination, because your parents or your kids are not on social media. So this could come under communication, but it's more on the dissemination side of things. A webinar series is something that is coming under dissemination, because the webinar series that you would organize around your topic is not specifically for your niche field, but it would be relevant potentially also for the adjacent disciplines and the research stakeholders, if you plan it and if you really create the concept strategically and think it through. Then the group website is something that this is more of a asset that you are creating for communication or for dissemination, that people can read more about you on your website. However, creating a group website is not communication or dissemination. This is creating content. You have to drive people to read that content, and how you drive people to read that content is through a YouTube video or a podcast, or being active on social media, or announcing that in your webinar series. You have to really think about creating the content, but then also communicating and disseminating it, because creating the content is only the first step. This next step is the distribution of the content and the promotion of the content that you have created. And an example that would make most sense to you, hopefully, is that writing a paper is creating the content. Publishing that paper is creating the content. Your publisher is taking care of the distribution, because they're making sure that it is on their website, so on and so forth. However, the third pillar of a good communication or dissemination plan is also the promotion. So you also have to promote the content that you create. Same thing with the group website. Group website is you're creating the content, but you also have to make sure that it is distributed and promoted, and not just sitting in some corner of the internet that is gathering dust. So thinking about that in that way. Also, dissemination is where you can showcase your creativity and your leadership and management skills beyond your scientific work that you would do. And as I mentioned before, Consolidator is not just for excellent science. It is also for you to create a research team and continue your career growth. And continuing the career growth and creating your team doesn't just happen by doing excellent research. There has to be also the leadership and active management, that you have to be a good manager, you have to be a good leader. And no scientist including me, were ever trained in being a good leader or being a good manager. This is not just valid for scientists. A lot of leaders and managers in industry as well, they have never been trained to be a leader or a manager. So this is something that you should really think about, and think about this additional budget that you also have, which you can use then for these kinds of activities. Now, for consolidator, a dissemination example is, for instance, if you do it strategically, if you plan for it, if you do it well in advance and you really execute it very well, then it has the potential to get you the awards. It has the potentials to get you the visibility and establish your credibility and attracting collaborations as well. So this is an example from a project that I am working on, which is the Contour project, which also won the IOP medal and award for the innovative public engagement. And of course, you don't have to do all of this, right? This is just an example for you. But what you can do is you can create a version of this for yourself. This is something that I want to tell you. You don't have to do everything. You have to make sure that what makes sense for you, what is possible for you and your team in terms of resources, time, and budget. This is something that is very important, because it all comes down to budget and incentives. It just does. Everything that you do, especially with dissemination or communication, will come down to the budget. Do you have the budget to train yourself on best practices in social media? Do you have the budget to create content explaining what your paper is about? Do you have the budget and a plan and the expertise to make sure that you're organizing this webinar series in your niche field that you're working in? You really have to think about how to budget for this, what is realistic for you, and how much it would cost. And when you're doing these things, you really have to make sure that you first use the resources that you have at hand. And this is my last slide here, the do's and don'ts as a consolidator grantee or in your application, starting with the what to avoid. Treating dissemination as a checklist item will not help you with establishing your credibility and proper dissemination to the right stakeholders in your research. Then only sticking with Open Doors Day as a dissemination activity. It's not really dissemination. As I mentioned earlier, it's more communication. And this is something that is not completely under your control when it is organized, how it is organized, how frequently it is organized. And the third thing that you should definitely avoid is waiting for your host institution's team, be it a press office, outreach office, communication office, social media office, whatever they are called, waiting for them to discover you and reach out to you because they somehow find out that you won the consolidator grant or you have a new team member or whatsoever. So waiting for the right people to discover you, do not do that. You need to be proactive. You need to be the one who is actively going out there and reaching out to them, building the relationships before you need something from them. This is very important, that don't just reach out to them at the last minute and say that, oh, actually, I have a paper in Nature or wherever you published. Everyone appreciates a heads up and a few weeks of notice so that they can deliver the best that is in their field of expertise and their deliverables. And then also expecting your team to organically take initiative, that your PhD student or a PhD researcher or a postdoc will just organically take the lead in talking about their research and your group essentially on their social media. It won't happen organically. And this is where you as a leader, you as a manager have to step in and set the expectations, give them the right skills and trainings and the media kit or whatever you call it, so that they feel confident and comfortable doing the dissemination of their work as well, or communication of their work as well. And the last one, but also very important, is underestimating how much work it is to do these dissemination activities. Even if it is creating or running a virtual webinar series, it is a lot of work. It doesn't just stop at organizing, getting a guest speaker, and then opening a Google Meet or Teams or Zoom meeting room for that to happen. You need to create the concept. You need to make sure that you are distributing it, you are promoting it, you need to make sure that it all makes sense, that the webinar series has some sort of theme that is making sense. So it's not like today you're talking about X and tomorrow you're talking about 2. It doesn't make any sense, right? It is a lot of work to do these sort of activities. So you really need to plan ahead. You need to be realistic as well. So avoid this, but then what you should do is actively reach out to your local team. This is very important. Involve them from the beginning and also build these relationships well in advance and also appreciate their work. This is something that you might assume that, oh, it's their job, right? That, of course, this is what they're getting paid for. Maybe, but is there a possibility for you to budget for their time or what will make their life easier when they're writing a press release or whatsoever about you? Is there a possibility that you can make their workload a little less by already budgeting for it so that you or your research or your news is not deprioritized because they have to first think about the institution's needs, right? So this is something that you should really plan and you should really consider. And then comes the leadership or rather management type of things, which is to educate yourself. This is very important that you are educating yourself and your team on the best practices in communication and dissemination. And this could be any and everything. Okay. It really depends on what you want to do and which direction you want to go in. But planning for it, budgeting for it is very important for upskilling your skills or your team skills. The budget you will potentially or definitely would need is for delegating, because one of the qualities of a good leader and a good manager is their ability to be able to delegate. You do not have to do everything yourself. You cannot do everything yourself. And as a good leader or a manager, you would realize that delegating is very important. You as a group leader cannot be the one who is creating the concept of the experiment, going in the lab, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and writing your thesis and then publishing it and whatsoever. You're not a PhD student anymore. You are a group leader. You're responsible for your team. You're a leader. So you really need to act and inform yourself as to how to be a good leader, how to be a good manager. And not just for yourself, budgeting and planning, not just for yourself of these skills, but also for the PhD students and postdocs as well, because these are the people who are going to be the scientists in the future, either in academia or any sort of academic system. So it's your responsibility to make sure that your team is also turning into a good leader and a good manager when they end up in those positions. So it's very important that you plan ahead and you budget for it. This is very important. And that is my last point, obviously, here, that you see that you need to plan ahead and you have to be strategic and you also have to be realistic. This is very important because when your project is running, if you want to work on a particular idea or if you want to take leadership coaching or training for yourself, it's not possible because you haven't budgeted for it. The ERC grant won't pay for it because you did not ask for that money. So you really have to make sure that you're budgeting for it and make sure that you're using the dissemination work package, not just to showcase your scientific excellence, but also showcasing you are a leader, you are a good manager, and you're thinking strategically. This is something that you really have to think about. And the dissemination work package is the best place to do that. So take advantage of that, plan ahead, be strategic, but also be realistic so that you don't end up with too many things to do on your plate and rather end up being happy at the end of your grant or also during the grant. This is very important. And with that, I come to the last slide. So if you have any particular questions or if you need help with your consolidator grant specifically, do reach out. I'm happy to help you out. And thank you all for sticking till the end. And I hope this was helpful for you all.